The captain of the Titanic smiles for the camera in 1912, but something behind him shocks the entire team. What if I told you that one of the most iconic photographs from the Titanic holds a secret that remained hidden for over a century? A shadow, a figure, something that shouldn't be there. Today, we're diving into one of the most chilling mysteries surrounding the world's most famous shipwreck. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about that fateful voyage in 1912. Before we begin, if you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And hey, I'm also developing another channel with even more incredible stories like this one, so stick around until the end for more details. Now, let's get into it. April 1912, Southampton, England. The RMS Titanic stood at the dock, a monument to human ambition and engineering prowess. At over 882 feet long and weighing more than 46,000 tons, she was the largest moving object ever created by mankind. Journalists, photographers, and curious onlookers gathered to witness history in the making. Among the rare photographs taken that day was one that would become particularly significant: Captain Edward John Smith standing on the bridge deck, his weathered face displaying a confident smile, his white beard neatly trimmed, his uniform pristine. The photograph was taken by Father Francis Brown, a Jesuit priest and amateur photographer who had boarded the Titanic as a first-class passenger for the first leg of the journey from Southampton to Queenstown, Ireland. Father Brown was known for his keen eye and his ability to capture moments that told stories. He took several photographs during his brief time aboard, but this particular image of Captain Smith would become one of the most reproduced photographs in maritime history. For decades, the image lived in archives, history books, and documentaries. It was a snapshot of confidence before tragedy, a moment frozen in time before the iceberg, before the screams, before the cold Atlantic claimed over 1,500 lives. It was nothing more than a historical artifact, a window into the past. Until 2019. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a digital restoration specialist working at the Maritime Historical Archives in Boston, Massachusetts, received a commission that seemed routine. A private collector wanted several Titanic photographs restored and enhanced using modern digital technology. The collector, whose identity remained confidential, had acquired original prints from Father Brown's collection and wanted them preserved in the highest possible quality. Sarah had been working in digital restoration for 15 years. She had enhanced Civil War photographs, cleaned up daguerreotypes from the 1800s, and brought clarity to countless historical images. She approached the Titanic photographs with her usual methodical precision. The technology available in 2019 was remarkable. High-resolution scanners could capture details invisible to the naked eye. Software algorithms could remove scratches, adjust contrast, and reveal information hidden in shadows and highlights. The photograph of Captain Smith was scanned at 4800 dpi, creating a digital file of extraordinary detail. Sarah began her work in late September, sitting in her small office overlooking Boston Harbor. The autumn sun streamed through her window as she zoomed into different sections of the image, examining the grain structure of the original film, looking for damage that needed repair. The captain's face was clear, his expression serene. Behind him, the wooden panels of the bridge, the brass fixtures, the windows looking out onto the deck. Everything appeared normal. Sarah worked through the foreground elements first, cleaning dust spots, adjusting the tonal range, bringing out details in the captain's uniform. Then she moved to the background. At first, it was just a slight irregularity in the tonal values. A patch of darkness near one of the windows behind the captain's left shoulder. Sarah assumed it was a chemical stain on the original print, or perhaps a developing artifact from 1912. She applied a selective adjustment, trying to even out the tones. But as she worked, the darkness didn't disappear. Instead, it became more defined, more structured. Sarah leaned closer to her monitor, her coffee growing cold beside her keyboard. She increased the magnification to 400%. The pixels expanded, revealing something that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a shape, human-shaped. A figure stood in the reflection of the window glass, positioned in a section of the ship where, according to the angle and the captain's position, no one should have been standing. The figure appeared dark, as if standing in shadow, but the definition was unmistakable. A head, shoulders, the suggestion of arms. Sarah sat back in her chair, her heart beating faster. She checked the image metadata, confirming this was the original scan, unmanipulated except for her restoration work. She hadn't added anything. She had only revealed what was already there. She called her colleague, Marcus Chen, into her office. Marcus had worked in photographic analysis for the FBI before retiring to do historical restoration work. If anyone could explain this, it would be him. If you're enjoying the video so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me continue bringing you these fascinating stories. Marcus examined the image for 20 minutes in silence. He ran it through analysis software, checking for signs of digital manipulation, double exposure, or optical illusions created by the grain structure of old film. Finally, he looked at Sarah with an expression she had never seen on his face before. "This is in the original photograph," he said quietly. "Whatever this is, it was there in 1912 when Father Brown took this picture." Sarah Mitchell couldn't sleep that night. The image of the dark figure behind Captain Smith haunted her thoughts. She lived alone in a small apartment in Cambridge, and the autumn wind rattled her windows as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that shape, that impossible silhouette standing where no one should have been. The next morning, she arrived at her office before sunrise. The city was still dark, the streets empty except for early delivery trucks and the occasional taxi. Sarah made strong coffee and pulled up every file related to the Titanic photograph. She needed to understand the context, the location, the exact moment this image was captured. Father Francis Brown had taken the photograph on April 10, 1912, shortly after the Titanic departed from Southampton. The time was estimated to be around 1:30 p.m. Captain Smith had been making his rounds, inspecting the ship, greeting important passengers. The photograph was taken on the bridge deck near the captain's quarters. Father Brown had asked permission to photograph the captain, and Smith had obliged, pausing for just a moment before continuing his duties. Sarah pulled up the deck plans of the Titanic. She studied the layout of the bridge area, tracing sight lines and angles. Based on the position of the captain and the camera angle, the window reflection showing the mysterious figure would have captured an area of the deck that was, at that moment, supposed to be restricted to crew members only. But more than that, the angle suggested the figure was standing in a position that would have been physically awkward, perhaps even impossible, unless they were deliberately trying to remain hidden. Marcus arrived at 8 o'clock, bringing bagels and looking as tired as Sarah felt. "I did some research last night," he said, spreading photographs and printouts across Sarah's desk. "I went through every known photograph taken on the Titanic during those few days. I wanted to see if this figure appears anywhere else." They spent the next 3 hours examining images. Father Brown had taken dozens of photographs. Other passengers had also captured moments aboard the ship. Sarah and Marcus looked at crowds on the deck, people in the dining rooms, groups posing near the grand staircase. They searched for anyone who might match the shape of the figure in the window reflection. Nothing matched. The figure's posture was unusual, slightly hunched. The head appeared to be tilted at an odd angle, as if observing something intently, or as if something was wrong with their neck. "There's something else," Marcus said, pulling up an enhanced version of the image on his laptop. "Look at this." He zoomed into the figure's outline. "The contrast here is all wrong. Everything else in the reflection matches the ambient light conditions you'd expect in that location at that time of day. But this figure is darker, much darker. like it's absorbing light instead of reflecting it. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, despite the warm office. Could it be a processing artifact, something that happened when the film was developed in 1912? Marcus shook his head slowly. I ran a spectral analysis. The tonal values are consistent with an actual object in the scene, not a chemical stain or developing error. Sarah, this was a real thing that was physically present when the photograph was taken. By late afternoon, they had contacted Dr. James Sullivan, a maritime historian and Titanic expert based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Sarah emailed him the enhanced photograph with a simple message. We found something in one of Father Brown's photographs. We need your expertise. Dr. Sullivan called within an hour. His voice was sharp with curiosity and excitement. Where did you find this? I've studied Father Brown's work for 30 years, and I've never seen this detail before. Sarah explained the restoration process, the high-resolution scanning, the enhancement techniques that had revealed the figure. She could hear Dr. Sullivan's breathing quicken on the other end of the line. Send me everything you have, he said. I need to verify the location, the time, the crew positions. If this is real, if this is actually in the original photograph, this changes things. This is significant. Leave a comment below about what you think this figure might be. I love reading your theories and responding to your questions. 3 days later, Dr. Sullivan arrived in Boston. He was a tall man in his early 60s with gray hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He brought with him a leather briefcase filled with documents, crew manifests, deck logs, testimonies from survivors, architectural drawings of the Titanic. They met in a conference room at the Maritime Historical Archives. Sarah projected the enhanced photograph onto a large screen. The three of them stood in silence, staring at the image, at Captain Smith's confident smile, at the dark figure behind him. Based on the angle and the reflection, Dr. Sullivan said finally, that figure would have been standing near the officers' quarters, close to the chart room. At 1:30 p.m. on April 10th, that area should have been relatively quiet. Most of the officers were at their stations or dealing with departure procedures. He pulled out a document from his briefcase. I have the duty roster for that day. First Officer William Murdoch was on the bridge. Second Officer Charles Lightoller was supervising lifeboat drills. Third Officer Herbert Pittman was checking cargo manifests. None of them reported being in that specific location at that specific time. What about passengers? Sarah asked. Could someone have wandered into a restricted area? Dr. Sullivan shook his head. Possible, but unlikely. The Titanic crew was very strict about access to officer areas, especially during departure. And look at the figure's posture. This doesn't look like someone casually wandering. This looks like someone who was deliberately positioned there, watching. Marcus pulled up another image on his laptop. There's something else I found last night. I went through the survivor testimonies, specifically looking for any mention of unusual sightings or strange occurrences during the voyage. He scrolled through a scanned document. Listen to this. This is from a testimony given by a crew member named Thomas Hart, a coal trimmer who survived the sinking. He gave this statement in New York in May 1912, a month after the disaster. Marcus read aloud. There was something wrong with that ship from the start. I don't mean the construction or the engines. I mean something else. Some of the boys below decks, we felt it. Cold spots in places that should have been warm from the boilers, shadows that moved when nothing was there. On the second night, I saw a figure standing near the cargo hold, just standing there, not moving. When I called out, it was gone. I told myself I was tired, that I was seeing things, but I wasn't the only one. Others saw it too. We didn't talk about it much. Sailors are superstitious, but we're not fools. Something was on that ship with us. The conference room fell silent. The autumn sun had set, and the room was lit only by the glow of the projector and their laptop screens. The figure in the photograph seemed darker in the dim light, more present. There are other accounts, Dr. Sullivan said quietly. I've come across them over the years in my research. Most historians dismiss them as trauma-induced memories, the mind trying to make sense of tragedy by adding supernatural elements. But there are too many similar reports. Crew members seeing figures in corridors, passengers reporting cold presences in their cabins. A stewardess named Violet Jessup, who survived both the Titanic and later the Britannic sinking, mentioned in her private diary that she felt watched during the Titanic voyage. She wrote about hearing footsteps behind her when no one was there. Sarah looked at the image on the screen, at Captain Smith, smiling, confident, unaware that in just 5 days he would go down with his ship, and behind him, that dark figure, watching. "What do we do with this?" she asked. "Do we publish it? Do we go public?" Dr. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. "We continue investigating," he said finally. "We document everything. We follow the evidence wherever it leads. And we prepare for the fact that we might never get a satisfactory answer." The investigation deepened over the following weeks. Dr. Sullivan returned to Halifax, but remained in constant contact with Sarah and Marcus. They established a secure online workspace where they could share documents, photographs, and research findings. What had started as a routine restoration project had become something consuming, something that pulled them deeper with each new discovery. Sarah began reaching out to other archives and institutions that held Titanic-related materials. She contacted the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum in Belfast, and private collectors around the world. She explained she was working on a comprehensive restoration project and needed access to any original photographs, particularly those taken by Father Brown or other passengers during the voyage. Several institutions responded with high-resolution scans of their holdings. Sarah and Marcus examined each image with meticulous care, zooming into backgrounds, studying reflections in windows and mirrors, looking for any other appearance of the mysterious figure. They found something in a photograph taken on April 11th, the day after the captain's portrait. This image showed a group of third-class passengers on the poop deck, smiling and waving at the camera. The photograph had been taken by a passenger whose name was lost to history. In the background, barely visible in the shadow of a ventilation shaft, was a dark shape. The resolution wasn't as clear as the captain's photograph, but the proportions were similar, human-shaped, standing motionless while everyone around it moved and posed for the camera. "Look at the other passengers," Marcus said, pointing at the screen. "No one is acknowledging this figure. No one is looking at it. Either they don't see it or they're deliberately ignoring it." They found a third image in a private collection in Southampton. This photograph showed the Titanic's engine room, taken during a brief tour given to first-class passengers on April 12th. The massive engines dominated the frame, their polished metal surfaces gleaming under electric lights. But in the far corner, partially obscured by a support beam, was another dark figure. Same posture, same unsettling stillness. Dr. Sullivan flew back to Boston in early November. The three of them met in Sarah's office on a cold, rainy evening. The windows were streaked with water, and the city lights reflected in broken patterns on the glass. "I've been going through crew testimonies more carefully," Dr. Sullivan said, spreading documents across the conference table. "Not just the official inquiry testimonies, but private letters, diary entries, interviews conducted years after the sinking. I'm finding a pattern." He pulled out a photocopy of a handwritten letter. "This is from Frederick Scott, a greaser who survived. He wrote this letter to his sister in 1915. He never sent it. It was found among his belongings after he died in the First World War." Dr. Sullivan read, "Mary, I need to tell someone the truth about the Titanic, even if I can never speak it aloud. There was something on that ship, something that didn't belong. I saw it 3 times. Once near the boiler rooms, once in a corridor outside the crew quarters, and once on the night we hit the iceberg. It was standing on the deck, near the bow, just standing there while everyone was running and screaming. I think it knew what was going to happen. I think it was waiting." Sarah felt her skin prickle. "He saw it the night of the sinking?" Dr. Sullivan nodded. There are other accounts. A lifeboat survivor named Helen Churchill told her daughter years later that as her lifeboat was being lowered, she looked up at the Titanic's deck and saw a figure standing alone near the officers' quarters, not moving, not trying to save itself, just watching the lifeboats descend. She said it terrified her more than the sinking itself. Marcus had been quiet, working on his laptop. Now he looked up, his face pale. I found something in the wireless records. The Titanic's radio operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were sending and receiving messages constantly. Most of it was passenger telegrams, weather reports, ice warnings. But there's a message here that was never delivered, never officially recorded. I found it in Harold Bride's personal notes, which are held in a private collection. He turned his laptop around. On the screen was a scanned page of handwritten notes. One entry, dated April 14, 1912, at 9:30 p.m., just hours before the iceberg strike, read, "Strange message received, not standard format. Interference, broken transmission. Message reads, it watches from the cold. It has always been here. It will take us down. No call sign, no sender identification. Phillips thinks it's a prank from another ship. I'm not so sure." The office felt colder. Outside, the rain intensified, hammering against the windows. "There's a theory I've been developing," Dr. Sullivan said slowly. "It's going to sound insane, but hear me out. What if there was something on the Titanic that the crew knew about, or at least suspected, but couldn't talk about? What if there were sightings throughout the voyage, strange occurrences that couldn't be explained, and the crew kept it quiet to avoid panic?" "You're talking about a conspiracy of silence," Sarah said. "Not a conspiracy in the traditional sense, Doctor," Sullivan replied. "More like a collective decision to maintain order. Think about it. The Titanic was the pinnacle of human achievement. Any suggestion that something was wrong, something unexplainable, would have created chaos. The crew would have been trained to maintain calm, to project confidence. If multiple crew members were seeing something they couldn't explain, they might have made an unspoken agreement to keep it to themselves. If you're still watching, hit that like button and subscribe. This story gets even more intense from here." Marcus pulled up the enhanced photograph of Captain Smith again. They had looked at it hundreds of times by now, but it never lost its power to disturb. The captain's smile, the dark figure behind him. "Look at his expression," Marcus said. "Really look at it. We've been focusing on the smile, interpreting it as confidence, but look at his eyes. There's something there. Tension. Awareness. What if he knew something was there? What if he could sense it, even if he couldn't see it?" Sarah zoomed in on Captain Smith's face. Marcus was right. The smile was there, but it didn't quite reach the captain's eyes. There was a tightness around them, a subtle tension in the lines of his face. "Captain Smith was an experienced sailor," Dr. Sullivan said. "He had been at sea for over 40 years. He had commanded ships through storms, through fog, through every danger the ocean could throw at him. Men like that develop instincts. They learn to sense when something is wrong, even if they can't articulate what it is." "So you think he knew?" Sarah said. "You think he sensed this thing, whatever it is, and he kept sailing anyway?" "What choice did he have?" Dr. Sullivan replied. "Turn the ship around because of a feeling, because some crew members reported seeing shadows. He had a schedule to keep, a reputation to maintain. The Titanic was unsinkable. That was the narrative. That was what everyone believed." They worked late into the night, cross-referencing testimonies, analyzing photographs, building a timeline of sightings and strange occurrences during the Titanic's brief voyage. A pattern emerged. The sightings increased as the voyage progressed. On April 10th, departure day, there were only 1 or 2 reports. By April 13th, there were at least a dozen accounts of crew members and passengers seeing or sensing something wrong. By April 14th, the day of the sinking, the reports became more frequent and more detailed. "It's like it was building towards something," Sarah said, "like it was getting stronger or more present as the ship approached the iceberg field." Marcus found one final document that night, a testimony that had been sealed in the British National Archives until 1982, 70 years after the sinking. It was from Second Officer Charles Lightoller, the highest-ranking officer to survive. The testimony had been given in private, marked as confidential, and deliberately excluded from the official inquiry. Marcus read it aloud, his voice steady but quiet. "I must report for the record, though I doubt this will ever be made public, that there were unusual circumstances during the voyage that I cannot explain through any rational means. Several crew members reported sightings of a figure aboard the ship that did not correspond to any passenger or crew member. I personally witnessed what I can only describe as a presence on the night of the sinking. At approximately 11:30 p.m., shortly before the collision, I observed a dark shape near the crow's nest. It was not one of the lookouts. It was not anyone I recognized. When I called out, there was no response. When I approached, it was gone. I have served at sea for 20 years. I have never experienced anything like this. I report it only because I believe the full truth of that voyage should be recorded, even if it is never believed." The rain continued outside. The three of them sat in silence, surrounded by documents and photographs, evidence of something that defied explanation, something that had been aboard the Titanic, something that might have known what was coming, and something that had been watching from the shadows while over 1,500 people sailed toward their deaths. December 2019. The investigation had been ongoing for 3 months. Sarah Mitchell sat in her office, looking out at Boston Harbor as snow began to fall. The city was preparing for Christmas, lights strung across streets, decorations in windows. But Sarah felt disconnected from the holiday atmosphere. The Titanic photographs consumed her thoughts. Dr. Sullivan had returned to Halifax, but they maintained daily contact. Marcus worked tirelessly, often staying at the archive until midnight, searching through databases and historical records. They had amassed an enormous amount of evidence: enhanced photographs, crew testimonies, wireless records, private letters, diary entries. All of it pointed to the same conclusion. Something inexplicable had been aboard the Titanic during its maiden and final voyage. But what was it? That question haunted them. Sarah had considered every rational explanation: a crew member in the wrong place at the wrong time, appearing in photographs through coincidence, light artifacts and photographic anomalies creating the illusion of a figure, mass hysteria among the crew, trauma-induced memories reshaping the past. But none of these explanations fit the evidence. The figure appeared in multiple photographs taken at different times by different people. The testimonies came from crew members who had no contact with each other after the sinking, yet their descriptions were remarkably consistent. And the photographic analysis showed that the figure was physically present in the original images, not added later, not the result of film degradation or processing errors. In mid-December, Sarah received an email from an unexpected source. The subject line read, "Regarding your Titanic research." The sender was Eleanor Walsh, a woman in her late 80s living in Cork, Ireland. She identified herself as the granddaughter of Father Francis Brown, the priest who had taken the original photograph of Captain Smith. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the email. Eleanor wrote, "I understand you have been studying my grandfather's photographs from the Titanic. I have something that might interest you. My grandfather kept private journals throughout his life. He never published his entries about the Titanic voyage, and the family has kept them confidential. But I am old now, and I believe the truth, whatever it is, should be known. Would you be willing to travel to Ireland to review these journals?" Sarah booked a flight the next day. She arrived in Cork on a cold, overcast morning 3 days before Christmas. Eleanor Walsh lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by bare trees and winter fields. She was a thin woman with white hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that reminded Sarah of the photographs she had seen of Father Brown. Eleanor welcomed Sarah into her home, offering tea and sitting by a fireplace where a peat fire burned. On the table between them was a leather-bound journal, worn and aged. "My grandfather was a complicated man," Eleanor said, her Irish accent soft but clear. "He was a priest, a photographer, an intellectual. He believed in God and faith, but he also believed in evidence and truth. What he experienced on the Titanic troubled him for the rest of his life." She opened the journal to a marked page. He wrote this entry on April 11th, 1912, the day after he disembarked at Queenstown. He had been ordered by his Jesuit superior to leave the ship and not continue to America. That order probably saved his life. Sarah leaned forward, reading the handwritten text. Father Brown's handwriting was precise and elegant. The entry read, "I have left the Titanic, though part of me wishes to understand what I sensed during my brief time aboard. There was a presence on that ship. I felt it most strongly when I photographed Captain Smith. The captain smiled for the camera, but I observed a darkness in his expression, a weight he carried. And behind him, I sensed something watching. I did not see it with my eyes, not clearly, but I felt it with certainty. It was as if death itself had boarded the ship, waiting patiently for its moment. I took several photographs, hoping to capture something, some evidence of what I felt. When I review them, I will look carefully. I pray I am wrong. I pray it was merely my imagination, but I fear I am not wrong." Sarah felt chills run through her body. "He felt it," she whispered. "He knew something was there." Eleanor nodded. "There's more. He wrote additional entries after the Titanic sank. He was devastated by the loss of life. He had met many of the people who died. He had photographed them, talked with them, and he blamed himself for not speaking up, for not warning someone, even though he knew he would have sounded insane." She turned to another page, dated April 20th, 1912, 5 days after the sinking. "My photographs have been developed. I cannot stop looking at the image of Captain Smith. There is something in the background, in the reflection of the window. A shape, a darkness. It is faint, but it is there. I have shown it to no one. What would I say? That I photographed death itself? That I captured evidence of something beyond our understanding? They would think me mad. Perhaps I am, but I know what I felt. I know what I sensed. That ship was marked from the moment it left Southampton. Something was aboard, something that had been waiting. For what purpose I cannot say, but I believe it was there to bear witness. To watch humanity's greatest achievement sail into the ice and darkness, to watch us fail. The fire crackled in the silence. Outside, snow began to fall. "Did he ever speak about it publicly?" Sarah asked. "Never," Eleanor replied. "He kept his suspicions private. He went on to become a renowned photographer, traveled the world, took thousands of images, but he never stopped thinking about the Titanic. In his final years, he told my mother that some things in this world cannot be explained or understood. He said we must simply accept that there are mysteries that will never be solved, shadows that will never be brought into light." Sarah returned to Boston on Christmas Eve, carrying scanned copies of Father Brown's journal entries. She met with Marcus and Dr. Sullivan via video conference on Christmas Day. They reviewed the new evidence, adding it to their growing file. "So where does this leave us?" Marcus asked. "We have photographs showing an unexplained figure. We have crew testimonies describing similar sightings. We have Father Brown's journal confirming he sensed something, but we still don't know what it was." "Maybe that's the point," Dr. Sullivan said. "Maybe this is one of those mysteries that doesn't have an answer. Not every question can be solved. Not every shadow can be explained." Sarah stared at her computer screen, at the enhanced photograph of Captain Smith. She had spent 3 months with this image. She had examined every pixel, every tonal gradation, every detail. And she was no closer to understanding what the dark figure behind the captain truly was. "I think we need to publish our findings," she said finally. "We need to present the evidence and let others examine it. Maybe someone else will find an answer we've missed. Or maybe the answer is simply that we don't know, that we can't know." Over the following months, Sarah, Marcus, and Dr. Sullivan prepared a comprehensive report. They documented the enhanced photographs, the crew testimonies, Father Brown's journal entries, the wireless records. They presented their findings at a maritime history conference in April 2020, exactly 108 years after the Titanic sank. The response was mixed. Some historians were fascinated, praising the meticulous research and the quality of the photographic enhancement. Others were skeptical, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that the figure could be explained through rational means that hadn't yet been identified. Some dismissed it entirely as sensationalism. But for Sarah, Marcus, and Dr. Sullivan, the truth of what they had found was undeniable. Something had been aboard the Titanic. Something that appeared in photographs, that was witnessed by crew members and passengers, that was sensed by Father Brown as he captured one of the final images of Captain Smith before the disaster. What was it? A premonition made visible? A manifestation of the tragedy to come, something that existed beyond the boundaries of what we understand as reality, or simply a series of coincidences and misinterpretations that created the illusion of something supernatural? Sarah never found a definitive answer. She continued to enhance and analyze the photographs, searching for more details, more evidence. But the figure remained what it had always been, a shadow, a darkness, a presence that defied explanation. On April 14, 2021, the 109th anniversary of the sinking, Sarah stood at her office window, looking out at the harbor. She thought about Captain Smith, smiling for the camera, unaware that death stood behind him. She thought about the 1,500 people who boarded the Titanic, believing they were on an unsinkable ship, never imagining that in days they would be at the bottom of the Atlantic. And she thought about the figure in the photograph, still there, still watching, still unexplained. Some mysteries, she realized, are meant to remain mysteries. Some shadows are never brought into light. And perhaps that's how it should be, because the unanswered questions are often more powerful than any answer we could find. The figure in the photograph remains silent, dark, watching from over a century ago, holding its secrets, defying our understanding. And perhaps, in the end, that's the most chilling part of all. Not knowing, never knowing, simply accepting that on that doomed voyage in April 1912, something was aboard the Titanic, something that watched as the greatest ship in the world sailed toward its destiny. And whatever it was, it's still there in the photograph, still watching, still waiting. Final call to action. So what do you think? Was there really something supernatural aboard the Titanic, or is there a rational explanation we haven't discovered yet? Leave your comments below. I absolutely love reading your theories and responding to your questions. This is the kind of mystery that keeps us up at night, and I want to hear what you think really happened. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the Titanic's most chilling mysteries, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. I have so many more unexplained historical mysteries lined up for you, stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the past. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, some questions are more powerful than their answers. Until next time, stay curious.